I run a youth marketing company. So every day, that's pretty much surrounding ourselves. In Joburg, there's a group of about 55 of us, some in Lagos, some in Nairobi, some in Durban and Cape Town, and we surround ourselves with kids, teens, and young adults up to the age of 25, and we've made a business out of doing that. So we're going to share some of the findings of what we do on a daily basis with you. But the question up on screen is your kid Nostradamus? So there's a lot of, at events like these and other conferences, there's a lot of discussion around trends and trend prediction and what does the future hold. And the future is getting tougher and tougher to predict because it's getting tougher and tougher world to understand in the present day, let alone in the future. So there's this kind of buzzword expression at the moment, which is living in a VUCA world. It's a crazy time and place. VUCA stands for volatile, unpredictable, complex, and ambiguous. And I think the world is VUCA, and I think probably more particularly, South Africa is about as VUCA as you can get. This place, unpredictability, complexity, ambiguity is the order of the day. So a lot of people are spending a lot of time trying to understand the now, but more importantly, trying to understand the future. And I think there's two groups of people who could do that with some credibility. The first group are people who spend a lot of time and money doing it on a daily basis, because literally it takes that level of commitment. And the second one is kids. Because I think youth current behavior is a pretty good predictor of what adult future behavior is going to look like. So we're going to share a little bit about what we've learned from young people, and you guys can decide whether your kids are Nostradamus and whether youth generally are good predictors of the future. When I'm speaking about young South Africans and when we're speaking about South Africa generally, we're not speaking about one population. The two pictures up on screen at the moment are not 200 kilometers apart. They're not even 20 kilometers apart. They're 2 kilometers apart. Sandton's Golden Mile and Alexandra Township. And those are two different worlds. VUCA, 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 trend prediction, trend prediction, trend prediction, harder and harder to do, particularly in South Africa. This is made worse, really, by the fact that that we have in South Africa the worst Gini coefficient in the world. So the Gini coefficient is an economic measure of the difference between the haves and the have-nots, so economic disparity. And we have the dubious honor, as of 2014, of having the worst Gini coefficient in the world. So there we are, that horrible little brown dot at the middle of, bottom of Africa, with the hugest disparity between people who have money and people who don't. And that in itself creates an interesting dynamic in terms of both the here and now and the future, and we'll have a look at that now. So before we get on to the kids, let's have a look at what the experts say. So very recently I was at the presentation of consulting firms, or pretty much the given understanding of experts, and PwC shared their 5 global megatrends. The first one is a huge change in demographics. So the world's population is going to explode. I don't think that's a particularly amazing trend prediction, but what it's going to do is bulge at two ends. So in what's currently called the developed world, Europe, North America, the population is going to get hugely old. And in the emerging world, South Africa, Middle East, Asia, India, the population is going to get hugely young. And we're going to see these two crazy tensions between old populations and young populations and a much bigger population altogether. And then we're going to see number two, some serious economic shifts. So for the last 50 years, economic power in the world has sat with what are pretty much by the UN called the G7, powers like the US, Canada, France, Italy, Japan. But in the last 10 or 20 years, we've seen the emergence of the E7, the emerging 7, and that's much more things like India, Brazil, Turkey. And they were non-players 20 years ago. But as things stand now, the E7 and the G7 are neck and neck in terms of world GDP. And PwC's prediction is by 2030, the E7 economical power will be 3 times the G7 economic power. So it's good news for us. It's demise of the West and rise of the rest, and Africa and South Africa is definitely part of the rest. Thirdly, they speak about huge urbanization. So in South Africa, for years, we've had a migrant culture out of rural areas into the cities as workers. And this trend is not slowing down. It's not slowing down in the continent, and it's not slowing down in the world. They predict that there will be, by 2030, 22 megacities in the world, a megacity being a city with a population in excess of 20 million people. And 10 million of those will be in Africa. But the opportunity there is huge infrastructure projects in these cities which create employment, obviously. Fourthly is exactly on that point of resources. By 2030, we're going to need 50% more energy, 40% more water, and 30% more food than we have now. And for the first time in any of these kind of trend predictions, mega consultant vibes, I've seen climate change step into the forefront and as one of the major predictions. And that stuff's hairy and scary. I mean, we have to start finding solutions really quickly about eating and giving ourselves stuff to drink by 2030. And then the connector for me is the last trend between the professionals, the consultants, and youth, the guys we consider really good predictors of the future. And there's no shortage of those on a daily and monthly basis. We see tech leapfrogs taking our consumer behavior to a whole different level. Uber and WhatsApp and a million different tech applications. Africa as a continent has just leapfrogged the landline. There are now on the African continent more cell phones than there are people, but there's the highest we ever got to in landline penetration per person was 5%. So this brings us to the kids, the important stuff and the cool stuff and their view of technology. So most of the stats and facts that I'm going to share with you are out of a study we run annually called Generation Next. So we've been running it for 11 years, and it's a study that we conduct in 6 provinces around the country. It's conducted amongst 5,500 respondents, so it's a pretty big study. And they're poor kids and wealthy kids from cities and townships, not so much a rural component to the study. And they're aged between 8 and 23. So it gives us a really good cross-section of what young South Africa is thinking about any particular issue. And what we've done for this presentation tonight is compare what we call the 7-year chasm. What has the shift been since the methodology of the study was a little bit different before, but between 2008 and 2015, what have the movements been in youth consumer behavior, and how might those help us understand what's to come in all consumer behavior? First up, as you'd suspect, is the cell phone. So 2008, Mix-It was huge. They shut shop altogether last month after having gone into 2 or 3 years of demise. And obviously that was across the globe being replaced by WhatsApp. The numbers below that are the average age of cell phone ownership. So in 7 years, we've jumped from 11 to 13-year-olds owning cell phones to, in this country, which is not a wealthy country as we saw, 6 to 9-year-olds owning cell phones. In 2008, youth spent an average of 1.2 hours a day, which at the time we were like, geez, this is getting out of hand. 1.2 hours a day of time on the internet. Now it's 2.1 hours a day. So where does television sit in this mix? South Africa is a huge television watching nation. We love television. SABC ad revenues tell us this. The multi-choice share price tells us this. We're seeing a huge shift here as well. So where we look at the TV-internet split in 2008, 84% TV, 16% internet. And in a very short space of time, and this is even more exacerbated if you look at the older age groups in this study, 54% TV and 46% internet. Young people don't like being served content. And I think if you kind of pop this thought into your mind as whatever, 20, 30, 40, 50 something, I think you'll have exactly the same thought. Like multi-choice, Mnet DSTV's running up to this trend with things like Explorer and Showmax to give people discretionary content. We don't want to be served content anymore that we don't want to watch. We want to pick the content we want to watch and when we want to watch it. And kids and teens were doing this 5 years ago already. This trend started in 2010 and 11. But of course for them, the internet is cell phone. So as a 40-year-old, a 30-year-old, you're pretty addicted to a 42-inch, 52-inch, huge big screen. There's no such addiction amongst 12-year-olds. They're addicted to a screen this big. So if we look at the divergence between fixed screen internet access and cell phone or mobile internet access, we're now at 78% mobile. The internet is on cell phones for young South Africa. And more importantly, it's becoming on smartphones more even than ordinary cell phones. So here's cell phone penetration in the country, and this is even further mapped in youth. We're at 47% cell phone penetration, hugely up from 2010. And BlackBerry was an Uber brand in this study for a long time. In 2009, 10, 11, what was a huge business tool in the rest of the world was a youth empowerment gateway in South Africa. It was the first access to affordable smartphones. BIS made data cost accessible, and that thing was crazy, man. It was booming. BIS ended, BlackBerry fell from fame and fortune, but of course the phenomenon of smartphones will never. I think as a predictor of what young adults use smartphones for, increasingly you hear people speak about how my iPhone feels like, my iPad feels heavy and cumbersome. I think the adult trend is towards things that are really small and compact and convenient, but of course for young people it's about cost. They can't afford a tablet, so they need a $800 device that is a camera, a telephone, a television, a social media broadcaster. That's exactly what smartphones are. So what about pop culture, which is the ambit really of young people? What trends have we seen here, and how do we see those flowing into adults? So here's a couple of 2008 pop culture trends. Top cartoon show at the time, SpongeBob, lives in a pineapple under the sea. SpongeBob SquarePants. Music retail still existed in 2008. So top music retailer was Musica, and top international celeb was David Beckham. And it's interesting how in 2015 some of that has changed and some of it hasn't. So Tom and Jerry, incredibly, in 2015, if you think SpongeBob was an oldie but a goodie, an oldier and a goodier, Tom and Jerry is now king of the heap in terms of animated TV shows. Of course, physical music retail is, even in this country, which has been slow on the uptake versus other countries, pretty dead. iTunes is the #1 music retailer. And another soccer star, but certainly a different one, Lionel Messi, taking position as top international celeb. What's happened in fashion? 2008, and I think you'll feel this as adults as well, surf brands were huge. Billabong, Roxy, Quicksilver were all in the top 5 fashion brands. And in South Africa, for youth, activewear is fashion. I mean, this has been a trend in the last 5 years. Even only by age 16 do we get into fashion labels. Guess and Sissy Boy are pretty much the two that feature most, but fashion for young South Africans is Nike, Puma, and Adidas. That's pretty much it. In the TV and music culture space, 2008, in Miley Cyrus version 1.0, Hannah Montana was king. Fear Factor was top TV reality show. Music TV was MTV, and Generations was king of the heap in soap operas. And believe me, in township South Africa, you could have got 1,000-to-1 odds that for the next 100 years, Generations would have been king of the heap. But of course, we've seen demise there as well. Chris Brown, I don't know what happened to eating worms. We now ice cakes as reality shows. Instead of like jumping off cliffs and eating worms, Fear Factor style, MTV has all but evaporated relative to Trace Urban, which is both top music channel and top TV channel overall. And a whole plethora of new soapies, including Scheme Song, have usurped the drama that was, both in real life and on screen, Generations. Overall top brands, there's been some shifts here, but you'll see some perennial favorites. Coke, in this survey, interestingly, which is a South African youth survey, but in every survey of top brands around the world, is the only brand that for the last 10 years has remained consistent in the top 10. Of course, in the last 10 years, Apple, Google, all of the tech brands have run up the charts, but Coke manages to be a perennial favorite that stays there and stays there. Old Man brand from 7 years ago, Mercedes-Benz, is now #1 motor brand and #4 brand overall, ahead of BMW has been a winner in this survey for 10 out of the 11 years we've polled. So then getting into the lifestyle stuff in the last stretch of my prezzo, South Africa is not a rosy place to live in. South Africans are copers. We deal with crime, we deal with corruption, we deal with inefficiency. And if you think adult South Africa has shit to deal with, young South Africa deals with even more, because they don't have the self-determination that we do as adults. So in the survey, we ask, what are your biggest fears as a kid, teen, or young adult? And here's what they were in 2008. Pretty serious stuff. Crime, death, and illness. Those are the top 3 fears amongst kids, teens, and young adults. And in 2015, we see quite a big suburbanization of those fears. The fears are still pretty scary. Losing my parents, being in a car accident. Most South African kids and teens are taxi commuters, and taxis are not a fun place to spend 2 hours a day, I can tell you. And thirdly, and this is interestingly resonant of what Steve was saying, failing my exams. And we see this over and over and over with urban and peri-urban, not just Sandton kids, the degree to which we're pressuring our children into overachievement. Like, it's not just going to a good school, it's going to the best school. It's not just doing 1 extramural, it's doing 3 extramurals. It's not just doing well, it's getting A's. It's not just being able to play rugby, it's being able to play rugby and cricket and swim. So that's a trend which youth are definitely not leading. We're leading as adults and pretty much suppressing the poor little oaks into this culture, pressure of overachievement. Preferred communication, the good old days. 2008, where number 1 preferred way of communicating with each other was face-to-face. Second was mix-it, as we said, all but gone. Cell phone conversations, and something that's definitely removed itself from the youth landscape in the last 5 years, SMSs. Why? Why would you pay 44 cents to send a message? But I can tell you, SMSs may have gone, but cell phones definitely haven't. And the antidote to cell phones from every parent around the country and around the world is pretty much this one. So no surprise then, having moved into number 1 spot of preferred mode of communication is instant messaging, second face-to-face, third cell phone conversation, and then social media is huge, but here we're speaking about one-to-one conversations. And if you think about it as an adult, the degree to which you now have either physical or cell phone conversations versus WhatsApp conversations, this isn't a teen phenomenon anymore. This is a 25, 35, 45, 55 issue. Similarly on Facebook, 3 years ago, nobody's aunties or mothers were on Facebook. Now everybody's aunties and mothers are on Facebook. And pretty much youth are backpedaling straight out of there. So what kids were doing on Facebook 5 years ago, teens were doing on Facebook 5 years ago, the rest of the adult market is now doing on Facebook. We ask in the survey, and just coming close to the end now, is what can't you live without? 2008, and I mean, here you know you're living in the developing world. Number 1, again, like face-to-face communication, good to see. Family is the first thing I can't live without. Mothers are clutching their hearts and pearls going, that's my boy. Number 2, cell phone, and number 3, money. We are a highly materialistic economy. This is not Scandinavia or Western Europe where you like shove your Rolex into your suit. You would never think of walking around with an LV bag. Here you buy the biggest possible LV bag, push your watch out of your suit. And it's definitely no different with kids, teens, and young adults. So a small shift there in 2015, which is interesting. Kyle, a little bit after me, is going to speak a little bit about music, which sits in number 2 now. Cell phones have pretty much become passport. So they don't get voted into position 1, 2, or 3, but that's just because they're given. Like, you wouldn't need one, everyone's got one. But number 1 remains family. And this brings me to one of my closing points, that we don't give youth a lot of credit for the degree to which they actually care about the world, each other, and their families. We think it's pretty much all about mobile phones, drinking, girlfriends. Drinking, obviously, 18 plus, I'm talking But an interesting trend, which is literally only over the last 3 years, is this huge rise of religion as a phenomenon in young South Africa. And this is across a whole lot of religions: Judaism, Islam, Christianity, Baha'ism. Religion is now one of the top 3 forms of self-expression in young South Africa, and as you see, it's also number 3 in what I can't live without. So I'm going to close quickly now and just kind of try to round out this decision whether our kids are Nostradamus, or at least relatively good predictors of what the future holds. I think there's definitely better predictors of the future to hang out with than the guys at PwC, if nothing else. Firstly, digital natives. At HDI, we speak about youth's cell phone pretty much being their third kidney. Every question we ask about leaving a burning house, going to a remote desert island, what would you take with? It's like literally no question, not my ID book, not my photo albums. I don't have a laptop, so I'm not taking that. It's my cell phone. But we're going to see a backlash against this thing of, please get off your effing phone for 5 seconds. Parents are losing their mind with it, but kids are starting to lose their mind with it as well. They're just starting to realize my Facebook friends aren't actually my friends, and I haven't been outside in 3 days. And I think kids, teens, young adults are going to lead the backlash. Just as immersed as they are in digital technology now, they're going to be the first to jump out of it and create a balance. Secondly, they're prosumers. So Procter & Gamble, the big FMCG company, P&G, coined this term. They turned consumers into prosumers. Prosumers because they no longer just consume brands and brand messages, they help create them. They produce brand conversations and messages. And I like the word prosumers because it kind of takes the word con out of consumers. And youth are not consumers who are easy to con, I assure you. We've heard this expression in focus groups more than once. We smell through the bullshit. And they're also great at having brand conversations. They don't even understand this phenomenon of wanting to have a one-way brand advertising engagement with us. And consumers, I think, across the board are getting as fed up with that old-style school of marketing. But thirdly, they're more sensible than we give them credit for. So group after group where we go, do you want a free party? Do you want reduction in school fees? You get hugely surprised about the sensible options that particularly township teens select. But that said, it is the Wild West out here, man, and cash and flash and bling and swing cannot be overestimated. You can pick any kid, poorest kid in a Soweto, richest kid in Alex, poorest kid in Bears Valley, richest kid in Sandton. They all want to stand out. Image counts. And I don't think that's any different to what we have created as adults. Lastly, there was this great article written for Time magazine by a guy called Joel Stein in 2013. It was a cover story, and it was called Millennials, the Me, Me, Me generation. Why these self-interested narcissists still live at home, and why they'll be the saviors of all of us. And I think that's exactly what they will be. And in South Africa, I think we can take some solace in the fact that the me, me, me luckily also includes friends and family and the us part of that equation. Good news for us, of course, is that the 1,500 of us here, I think most of us have moved beyond the 8 to 23-year-old me, and we're part of the us. And that makes me feel cool about young South Africa. It makes me feel cool about South Africa, and it makes me feel cool about the future. So thanks so much for being here and for listening. That's me. Thank you.